Welcome back, folks, to Infinite Podcast. Today we're venturing into the dark abyss, talking about Paris catacombs. Simon, can you believe those bone chambers started as just quarries? Then boom, they ran out of cemetery space, and suddenly it's storage for 6 million skeletons. City planning gone morbid, if you ask me. What's your take on turning a mining site into an underground mausoleum?
Turning quarries into a skeleton closet? Sounds like Paris scored the ultimate two-for-one deal. Dump your dead, support your city, and hey, become a hot tourist spot 200 years later. Need more closet space? Just bury them under the streets. It's practical, but definitely adds a new layer to city foundations, don't you think?
Practical maybe, but let's talk respect. Stacking bones like firewood? When the dead become a tourist attraction, we tread a fine line. We can't just defend it with space saving. Imagine relatives visiting Grandpa's skull by flashlight. Isn't there something unsettling about making death an exhibit? A city's foundation should honor the past, not exploit it. Respect matters, even after you're gone.
Respect? Absolutely. But let's not pretend every skeleton in those catacombs had relatives lining up with flowers. Plenty were the forgotten ones. No names, no markers. They've got a squad now. Plus, being part of a historical monument, some might call that an upgrade from an unmarked grave. Turning it into an attraction gives them more attention than they probably ever got alive.
I hear you, Simon. It's a sad truth. A lot of those souls were the nameless faces of history. Now, together, they're part of something bigger. If nothing else, they do spark these conversations, making us reflect on mortality, history, and humanity. Their unmarked lives are now marked permanently in the stone tapestry of Paris. Touches a nerve when you think about the legacy we all leave behind.
Reminds me of this one time. I stumbled upon my great-uncle's war medals tucked away in an old shoebox. Dude was a hero, but the family rarely mentioned him. Guess life and new generations turned the page. Digging through his stuff, it felt like unearthing hidden history, a personal catacomb moment. Makes you wonder how much is buried, not just under cities, but in our attics, waiting to be part of a bigger tale.
Simon, that's the perfect metaphor. Just like those Parisian bones tucked away under the city, we all have histories collecting dust in our attics. These war medals, old photos, they're everyday catacombs hiding in plain sight, caching our personal histories and forgotten heroes. And much like the catacombs protect the past beneath Paris, our own shoeboxes safeguard our family lore. Might be time to start digging around before they're reduced to relics without a story.
That's poetic and all, but let me challenge the rose-colored glasses view. Our attics are messy, forgotten places for a reason. We stash what we don't want to deal with up there, like how Paris shoved bones underground when they became inconvenient. It says something about us, doesn't it? Out of sight, out of mind, whether it's Grandpa's letters or generations of the departed. Maybe we're not safeguarding, we're just avoiding. Thoughts?
You've got a point, Simon. It does reveal our out-of-sight, out-of-mind attitude. Both the Paris catacombs and our cluttered attics are proof that we often choose to hide away history rather than face it. We avoid until we can't anymore, just like Paris did with its dead. They didn't tackle the issue until they had no choice but to turn skeletons into an underground jigsaw puzzle. Maybe it's human nature, or maybe it's just easier to close the closet door than to sort through what's behind it.
Hey, new listeners. You've jumped into a deep chat about Paris's bony underbelly. We've been comparing the catacombs, those spooky tunnels filled with skeletons, to our own dusty attics. It's all about how we deal with the past. Paris turned old quarries into macabre storage units when cemeteries overflowed, while we pack away Granddad's war medals amongst Christmas decor. Either way, it's history hidden from sight. Catchy stuff, huh? Join the convo.
Sure makes you rethink the term skeletons in your closet, doesn't it? If Parisians can turn their basements into a spooky slumber party for the departed, what's stopping us from turning our attics into museums of awkward family heirlooms? Here on the left, folks, we have Aunt Edna's infamous fruitcake, petrified, could survive an apocalypse. And on the right, behold, the collection of expired coupons, because who knows when you'll need 50 cents off mustard from 1992.
Ah, but let's pump the brakes on the attic museum plan. Nostalgia's a beast, agreed, but there's a line between cherishing and hoarding. Paris turned their bone problem into a cultural goldmine, sure, but do we need to follow suit? They had no choice. We do. A catacomb's cool because it's rare, it's history. Your expired coupons aren't exactly UNESCO material, right? It's okay to let go of clutter, maybe hold on to the stories instead.
So, Simon, where do you draw the line between honoring history and just hoarding junk? How do we decide what gets a spot in our personal catacombs and what gets tossed?
Oh, the million-dollar question. Here's my take. If it tells a story or stirs the heart, it earns its keep. Your grandpa's love letters? Keep 'em. That broken toaster with emotional value? Please. Time to channel our inner Marie Kondo. Does it spark joy or is it just taking up space? The Paris catacombs, they sparked something, right? They turned necessity into wonder, a masterclass in recycling. If your attic gems don't do that, maybe they're better off as, well, just gems of memory.
Agree to a point. Every item's got potential to be a story trigger for someone. But the catch is, if everything's special, then nothing is. Scrutinize that clutter, keep the gems, ditch the junk. It's all about balance.
Hold up, Joe. Playing devil's advocate here. Maybe there's no such thing as just junk. What if every bit of clutter is a piece of someone's puzzle? Losing one could mean losing part of the narrative, man. The Paris catacombs are revered because they didn't discriminate. They kept it all. Same goes for our stuff. It's a tangible link to the past. Sure, balance is great and all, but let's not be too quick to toss things away without recognizing their potential significance.
All right, folks who are just tuning in, you're dropping into a lively debate comparing the infamous Paris catacombs, a labyrinth filled to the brim with the bones of the past, to our own personal attics where we stash mementos and memories. We're wandering through the idea of what we keep, what we toss, and what it all says about us alongside history's backdrop. So think of this chat like your grandma's attic, full of hidden treasures with a story minus the dust. Keep listening as we unpack more of history's hidden hideaways.
Digging back into the dark, tucked away under the city of light, those Paris catacombs started as limestone quarries, right? Then, due to health issues from overcrowded cemeteries, boom, they pack 'em with 6 million folks' remains. Instant macabre marvel. What a wild pivot, from mining to memorial. Kind of like when you're cleaning your garage, stumbling on old baseball cards, and suddenly you're knee-deep in memories instead of junk. It's about making the best out of a messy situation. The catacombs? They're that on a grand scale, history's recycling program gone gothic.
Absolutely, Simon. Talk about making lemonade out of lemons, or in this case, turning quarries into crypts. Now that's a pivot. Paris just flexed on the world, showing how you can take a mess and turn it into something unforgettable. And it makes you wonder, what are the origins of these catacombs? What stories do they whisper from the shadows of history? Let's peel back some layers on that next time.
You know what's wild, Joe? Each skull down there isn't just part of the decor. It was like an actual person with a life and stories. Imagine if we could play detective and use bone analysis to uncover who they were. We might dig up some ties to major historical throwdowns or find links between today's Parisians and their old-school counterparts. How gnarly would it be to discover your great-great-great-grand whatever has been chilling under the streets this whole time?
Honestly, Simon, it's mind-blowing. Think about it. Those skulls could unravel so many untold stories. With bone analysis, we might not just get names, we could piece together lives, unmasking the anonymous dead. Could be anyone from a Napoleonic soldier to a French Revolution dissident. Real connection or not, Parisians walking overhead are living atop a direct line to history. The possibility of retracing your ancestry down into those shadowy depths, that's next-level family tree research right there.
No kidding. It's like a historical lottery. Bonkers to imagine strutting down the boulevard with no clue your ancestors are part of the literal foundation beneath you. It's personal history meets urban legend.
So Simon, if we could identify these people, don't you think it would change the whole dynamic of how we see the catacombs? From a spooky tourist spot to something more personal, like a communal grave with a name tag.
But throw a name tag on a skull, and is it still the same? Look, I get the pull. Giving names to bones seems respectful, more personal. Yet maybe there's something powerful in the anonymity, like it represents every man's journey. Plus, think about the eerie vibe it's got going. If it turns into Great Aunt Marie's final resting place, might lose some cool points. Keeps you guessing and imagining, right? That mystery is part of the catacomb charm.
Hey there, new listeners. You're dropping into a chat about Paris's famed catacombs and the potential of uncovering personal stories from the anonymous remains stacked within. We've been tossing around the idea of whether to keep the mystery or slap name tags on these historical folks' foreheads, weighing the notions of respect against preserving the catacombs' enigmatic appeal. Stick around as we keep digging through what could be humanity's most profound underground connection to the past. No shovel needed.
All right, stay with me here. What if slapping a name on those skulls strips away the allure and turns it into just another cemetery? I mean, part of the catacombs vibe is the whole Valley of the Shadow of Death thing they've got going on. But credit where it's due, knowing who's who would be a game changer for history buffs. Question is, do we want faces to these stories, or does the anonymity make us respect them more, like they stand in for all of humankind? It's such a philosophical can of worms, or should I say, can of bones.
Simon, splashing names on the catacombs could actually make them less relatable. That anonymity lets anybody project their story onto it. That's powerful. And let's not forget the logistical nightmares. How many bones can you realistically name? But don't get me wrong, the history buff in me is tempted by the personal tales we'd unearth. Imagine the narrative depth we'd add to our collective history. It really pulls at you. A true philosophical tug of war.
Totally with you. And on that note, Joe, what's your take? Do you think knowing the names and stories would make us feel closer to history, or risk losing that universal connection we've got going now?
Well, Simon, here's another angle. Knowing the names might just shrink history down to a mere list of individuals. It fragments the big picture. The vastness and the shared human experience get lost amidst personal tales. There's a power in the collective unknown. It speaks to our shared mortality, echoing broader themes that resonate across cultures and eras. Plus, that mystery drives curiosity, fuels imagination, vital sparks for engaging with our past. Sometimes not knowing invites a deeper connection than any name ever could.
Oh, this totally reminds me of when my Uncle Louis stopped by for a family reunion last summer. He's the guy with the metal detector who spends weekends hunting for buried treasure in people's backyards. So he's showing off these random old coins and bits of broken jewelry to everyone, right? And we're all oohing and ahing over this stuff, but none of it has any names or clear history attached to it. Now, the funny thing is, my cousin starts spinning these wild tales about each item, like one coin belonged to a pirate, another to a lost love. And suddenly, these things mean more to us. We were so hooked on the stories, connecting as a family over these unnamed treasures. The lack of specifics didn't matter. What mattered was that shared sense of wonder. It made me realize knowing too much could have spoiled our fun, just like slapping names on those skulls might take away from their universal appeal.
Exactly, Simon. Uncle Louis's unnamed treasures sparked something that facts alone can't. Much like his coins, the catacombs' power lies in the untold stories. Sure, detailed histories are fascinating, but they often serve a single thread of the narrative tapestry. The anonymous skulls tell every person's tale. They're not just Parisian, they're universally human. They remind us of our collective journey through time. In their silence, they're screaming thousands of stories. Stories we create, stories that bind us, not just to history, but to each other. It's these shared echoes in our bones that resonate more deeply than any one resolved mystery ever could.
I hear you, Joe, but let me play devil's advocate for a sec. What if we're missing out? Sure, Uncle Louis's coin stories brought us together. Yet, what if one of those coins was the last penny of an unsung hero or dropped during a pivotal historic moment? Ain't there something thrilling about brushing against the coarse fabric of history rather than just imagining how it feels? Not saying we bulldoze the mystery, but picture this. You walk in there knowing that skull number 247 is Jean-Luc the baker who saw Paris rise and fall. Doesn't that swish of connection just amplify the majesty of it all?
The prospect does have its own magic, Simon. Knowing Jean-Luc's story would add layers we can't just dream up. It bridges time gaps with reality, a tug on the heartstrings of history. But here's a thought to chew on. If we pull too hard on those strings, do they unravel the mystery that keeps us coming back? Or maybe, just maybe, it strengthens our bond with the past, creating an even more compelling cadence in this great symphony of human existence. What's your take, folks?
And speaking of that symphony, it doesn't just have deep notes. It's got some high-pitched squeals that sound a lot like laughter if you listen close enough. There are so many stories from these underground treks that lean more on the side of specters pulling pranks than the somber echoes of history. Have you heard the one about the explorer who swore he heard ghostly whispers guiding him out, only to find out it was his buddy with a walkie-talkie? Every shadow's an actor, and every echo's part of the script down there.
You know, Simon, that reminds me of this time I took a night tour there with a couple of friends. We were creeping along, and one friend suddenly says he feels a cold hand on his shoulder. He's freaking out. We're all ready to bolt, thinking we've finally met the Catacombs' oldest residents. Turns out it was just our other buddy who doubled back for a laugh, icy fingers and all. We couldn't stop laughing. It turned an eerie expedition into one of the best memories ever. It's those unexpected moments, the mix of thrill and humor, that really stick with you.
Classic. Shows you it's the living that bring the most life to those bones, not to mention the best stories. Who needs ghostly whispers when you've got friends like that?
Absolutely, Simon. Live pranksters trump ghosts any day for entertainment. But let's flip this on its head. What if some of these so-called pranks were not pulled by our living pals? I mean, imagine a catacomb newbie hearing those whispers and finding out they're all alone. Could it be the echoes of past lives still clinging to their skeletal remains? Or maybe even Parisians from long ago, pulling one over on us from beyond the grave? Now that's a story. Keeps both skeptics and believers on their toes, or should I say tibia.
Oh man, Joe, the idea of actual catacomb ghosts trying to punk us? That's some grade A spooky stuff right there. Plus, it's like they're saying, hey, you think these old bones can't have fun? I'd pay good money to see a skeptic turned believer running out of there with a tale that turns their knees to jelly. It's the perfect blend of thrill and laughs, like a good horror flick where you don't know whether to scream or crack up. But hey, if any spirits want to toss me winning lottery numbers, I'm all ears, ghostly or not.
Ha, Simon, maybe we've been looking at this all wrong. These catacomb ghosts might just be bored out of their skulls, literally. Picture a grinning spirit floating by, thinking, you know what Jean-Luc the baker would love? Giving these live folks the runaround. And if any ethereal being starts tossing lottery numbers my way, I promise we'll split it 50-50, afterlife tax-free. Now there's an after-party I'd RSVP yes to in a heartbeat.
I'm all in for that spooky sausage fest, Joe. Seriously though, if the dead are really just craving some chuckles, who are we to disappoint? Count me in for an after-hours ghostly gag reel down in the catacombs. Imagine being part of those legendary tales. Did you hear about the living guys who brought knee slappers back to the land of headstones? Now that's a legacy worth leaving, or haunting.
All right, but let's consider respecting the dead, Simon. The idea of disturbing eternal rest, even for a laugh, doesn't sit well with everyone. It's sacred ground for some folks. If it's true that those souls are still down there, maybe they deserve their peace and quiet without our shenanigans echoing off their final resting walls. There's something about honoring the solemnity of their repose that should trump even the heartiest of laughs. Plus, maintaining that reverence lends even deeper significance to every echo, every shadow. Balance, that's the key.
I get where you're coming from with the whole respect angle, Joe. So how do we strike that balance between sharing a laugh and keeping things respectful? Where's that line in the catacombs sand? Too irreverent on one side, too somber on the other.
Navigating the catacombs responsibly means keeping the yucks lighthearted, Simon. Maybe it's by sharing jokes among friends that lighten the mood without mocking the dead. Or we spin yarns that end with a wink rather than a shiver, focusing on the hearty human spirit rather than the eerie aura. It's simple. Don't touch or disturb what's there. Keep pranks amongst the living and in good taste. We're merely visitors in their underground realm. A guest never wants to be the reason a host turns in their grave.
Sure, we gotta toe that line carefully. But think about it. The very nature of the catacombs is one giant push and pull between life and death. Let's say we go down there totally somber, no chuckles allowed. Doesn't that kill the vibe, no pun intended, of what makes us human? Even in our final resting places, don't you think there's room for the echo of laughter that once filled our lungs? It's keeping the dead alive in a way. We remember them not just with a solemn nod, but with a full belly laugh too.
I hear you, man. It's like this. Life's a wild ride full of highs and lows, laughs and cries. Even in death, why should that change? The laughter doesn't have to stop because we're 6 feet under. I say let it rip, as long as it's not disrespectful. Life, death, the whole cycle, it can be tough to grapple with, but finding humor in the midst of it is human. It's real. That laughter might just be the best homage we pay to those who've passed on. Keep the stories alive. Keep the joy flowing. If anything, that's respect.
Totally, Joe. Laughter is the soundtrack of the soul, living or departed. If the echoes down there are cackling with us, then I'd say we've made the right kind of connection. So, who's got a good ghostly whisper or a mortal prank story from the crypt to share? Hit us up. I'm all ears for a bone-rattlingly good tale.
You know what, Simon? This whole idea of laughter and respect in the catacombs really taps to a bigger issue. It's this tightrope we're walking between wanting to experience these incredible historical places up close and the need to preserve them. It's not just about us enjoying the moment. I mean, think about it. Tourism breathes life into these sites, but can also wear them away. How do we keep the balance so that both our desire to explore and our duty to honor history can coexist without one throwing the other off balance?
Man, Joe, if we're talking about balancing tourism and respect, it's like trying to walk a greased tightrope while juggling ancient vases. You want to see the cool stuff, but one wrong step and Grandma's ashes are getting mixed up with your dropped ice cream cone.
That's spot on, Simon. Consider the wear and tear of thousands of footsteps over time. It adds up. Then there's the dilemma of some tourist-reliant locales potentially prioritizing profit by allowing too much access. Places like the catacombs get more fragile with each visit. So should we set stricter limits? Maybe implement better education about the importance of preservation? It could help tourists become caretakers instead of just consumers, keeping the vases upright and the ice cream in the cone, so to speak. It's all about that careful stewardship.
Sure, but here's a thought. What if by tiptoeing around too much, we turn these places into untouchable shrines where no one really gets to experience anything? I mean, come on. If you pay to see the Great Pyramids and they hand you a pair of binoculars at the gate, you're going to feel ripped off. It's like going to a pizza joint and just smelling the pizza. We can preserve and respect, sure, but let's not forget why these spots became famous. They've got a wow factor that no do not touch sign can replace.
Oh, absolutely, Simon. There's got to be a middle ground between preservation and experience. It's like going on a safari and the guide saying, to respect the wildlife, we'll be touring in blindfolds. Makes you wonder why you left your couch. There has to be a way to let people touch history without leaving fingerprints all over it.
So, Joe, how do you think we can craft that touch but don't disturb experience in historical places? What's a solid game plan for letting folks feel the past without us messing up the future?
Well, Simon, I'd argue that not every experience needs to be hands-on. We can craft immersive experiences using tech, think VR and AR, allowing visitors to step back in time while keeping the real site untouched. And hey, they still get a wow moment without risking damage. Plus, this could funnel some tourist dollars into conservation efforts, making the whole thing more sustainable. Good stewardship isn't just about access, but also ensuring these wonders are around for generations yet unborn.
But hold up. Let's not get carried away with this digital daydream. Isn't slapping VR goggles on everyone just a fancy way of saying, sorry, you can't handle the real thing? I mean, people travel for that authentic, gritty experience. If they wanted a video game, they'd stay home. Where's the adventure in pixel watching? Sure, we're saving the past for the future, but if no one's really touching history, what's the point? We might as well be preserving it under glass and admiring from afar. Kinda loses its magic, don't you think?
Hey, new listeners, you've jumped into a lively chat where we're wrestling with this. How do we soak up the marvels of historic sites without loving them to death? Simon and I are juggling the hot potato of getting up close and personal with places like catacombs and pyramids, balancing that awe-inspiring touch with making sure they don't crumble to dust under our feet. Are we supporting conservation by visiting, or does slapping on VR goggles at these ancient hotspots sterilize the adventure? It's a conundrum, preservation versus experience, and we're all about digging into it without burying the fun. Stick around for more banter.
So, Joe, do you think there's a one-size-fits-all approach to this, or should each historical site have its tailor-made solution? How can we adjust the dial between conservation and visitor thrill for each unique place?
No way, Simon. A one-size-fits-all solution is like using a sledgehammer for surgery. It's just not precise enough. Every site's different, right? They've got their own needs, stories, and fragility levels. What works for the Roman Colosseum might not fly for the catacombs of Paris. It takes a custom solution, like maybe tech enhancements somewhere, guided tours with limited access elsewhere, or interactive museums on site to absorb some visitor traffic. Let's tune that dial carefully. Each place tells its own story, and how we listen should reflect that.
Hold on, though. We can't take this bespoke approach to every dusty corner of the globe. How practical is it to lay out tailored plans for thousands of sites? We'd need an army of historians and tech geeks working nonstop. It might sound harsh, but some spots could be overprotected, or worse, completely forgotten, leaving us with a patchwork of well-funded tourist traps, while other less sexy places rot away from neglect. That generic sledgehammer might just be what most can realistically handle.
You make a fair point, Simon. It's true. Crafting individual conservation strategies is resource-intensive, and not every historical site has the same allure or budget as the Taj Mahal or Machu Picchu. Take Pompeii, for instance. Despite its significance, it struggles with preservation due to weathering and a lack of funds. And while Egypt's pyramids are iconic, just nearby, lesser-known but crucial sites get less attention and degrade with time. On top of that, there's the UNESCO World Heritage List aiming to spotlight culturally rich spots, but also inadvertently driving massive tourism that can harm those very places. Some countries lack the infrastructure to manage these inflows, so we're caught in this tough balancing act, promoting global heritage while treading lightly enough to preserve that heritage for the future. The logistics of actually pulling off such bespoke preservation tactics are daunting, especially when resources are unevenly distributed.
So where's the sweet spot? If you ask me, we gotta teach respect. Encourage travelers to treat these sites not just as a photo op, but as a school of history. It's a two-way street. Sure, keep the funds flowing for upkeep, but turn tourists into part-time guardians. Let them know that their footsteps echo through time, and they should tread lightly. As for tech, use it but don't rely on it. Nothing beats the tingle down your spine when you're standing right where history happened. No VR can match that. I'm all for smart, sustainable travel that gives back as much awe as it takes.
Simon, that's the heart of it, education. If travelers grasp the weight of where they stand, respect follows. Like teaching kids to handle a family heirloom, it's delicate, priceless. Helping tourists get why these places matter turns them into allies in preservation. Funds are part of the game, but awareness is currency too. The ultimate thrill of travel is connecting with the past, not just snapping pics. Teach care, and the echo of their steps could be a reverence that keeps history alive for all.
But here's the kicker, Joe. Can you really educate every tourist that walks into the Colosseum? We're talking about throngs of people who might be more interested in gelato than gladiators. It feels a bit like herding cats. Sure, you can try to teach them tricks, but at the end of the day, they're going to do what they want. There's only so much respect signage and pamphlets can achieve before someone decides it's cool to climb on an ancient wall for a selfie. And let's face it, Not everyone is there for a history lesson. Some folks just want to check a box and move on to the next hotspot.
I hear you, Simon. It's true. You can't force-feed history to someone just looking to tick off their bucket list. You can't get every single visitor to care deeply about the story behind the stones. And yeah, for every traveler moved by standing where Caesar stood, there's someone else whose highlight is that gelato they had on the way in. The effort it takes to instill respect is immense, and honestly, it can be disheartening when it feels futile. But I suppose that's part of the challenge we're up against, making people give a darn in a world buzzing with distractions. The goal's worthy, but boy, is it an uphill battle.
Could it be, Joe, that we're putting too much stock in trying to mold every tourist's mindset? I mean, sure, awareness is ideal and all, but when you've got a melting pot of visitors, is this goal of turning them into history buffs realistic, or are we setting ourselves up for disappointment?
Yeah, Simon, maybe we're overshooting the runway a bit on this. Expecting every tourist to turn into a history buff is like expecting every gym goer to become a bodybuilder. It's just not going to happen. People are different, and they travel for different reasons. Some will absorb the history, others won't. And that's okay. Maybe the focus should be more on creating an environment where those who want to learn can, without forcing it down everyone's throat. It's about balance, keeping it accessible while protecting these places so they don't turn into ruins from our own time.
Well, let's shake things up a bit. What if we swing the other way? Imagine cordoning off every historical gem from public access unless you pass some sort of interest in history quiz. Welcome to the Parthenon. Oh, you think Socrates was a soccer star? Sorry, no entry for you. I mean, where do we draw that line? Sure, it keeps the uncaring masses out, but then aren't we just creating an elitist history club? And who decides who's worthy? Some bespectacled gatekeeper with a checklist of cultural knowledge? Sounds like a recipe for outrage and one-star reviews to me.
That's hilarious, Simon. Imagine the gatekeeping on that. Nope, Socrates isn't a sports brand back of the line. But you're right, it would feel pretty exclusive and snobby. It goes against the whole idea of history belonging to everyone. There'd definitely be an uproar, and honestly, it'd kill the joy of discovering these places. While we want people to care, turning historical sites into a members-only club ain't the way. We'd all miss out on those unexpected moments where a place just grabs someone who knew nothing about it before walking in. Those moments can be magic.
Oh, for sure. I'm picturing those velvet ropes and the eye rolling now. But let's circle back a sec, Joe. You talked about Pompeii struggling with funding and the weather. How do you think places like that should balance exposure with preservation? If we're not keeping them under lock and key, what's a realistic way to protect them amid all this unpredictability?
So this takes me back to a trip I had years ago to Venice. There I am in St. Mark's Basilica, completely captivated by the golden mosaics and the history just oozing from the walls. Venice is kind of notorious for flooding, and they've got these raised walkways for when the water comes up, real band-aid fixes to bigger issues, but effective in their own right. Anyway, as I'm standing there, I overhear this guide talking about the city's preservation efforts, how they limit numbers inside the basilica, have strict rules against eating or drinking on the squares to preserve both the place and the experience. And it clicked for me. It's like throwing a house party but making sure people take their shoes off at the door. You're still welcoming guests, but you're protecting your home at the same time. It's not perfect. Tourists still crowd the city. But with some rules and a bit of that Venetian ingenuity, they strike a manageable balance between letting people witness the wonder while keeping an eye on the future. They don't lock Venice away, but they also don't roll out the red carpet for damage to set in either. The equilibrium they find might just be what places like Pompeii are looking for, a thoughtful middle ground.
Hey, fresh listeners catching the wave, Simon here to give you the scoop. Joe and I have been deep diving into a real noodle scratcher. How do we hug our fave historical spots without squeezing the life out of them? We're tossing around ideas like making sure visitors appreciate these sites beyond just snagging selfies, but it's tougher than teaching my grandma Snapchat. From roping off ruins to keeping Venice afloat, we're pondering if there's a balance between protecting the past and flinging the doors open for all. Stick with us. We've got more banter in the bank.
Right on, Simon. We're neck deep in the preservation paradox here. It's like having a classic car. Everyone loves to see it at car shows, but if too many folks take it for a spin, that beauty is going to break down faster than you can say antique. Now scale that to monuments older than your grandpa's grandpa. The piece we're juggling is wanting people to connect with these spots, to have that moment where it hits them just how staggering our history is, but also keeping them from wearing it down to a nub. How? Well, it starts with small steps. Cap those visitor numbers, instill strict look-don't-touch rules, add incentives for off-peak visits, maybe even employ modern tech to help people peek into the past without putting their paws on it. But most importantly, and let's not lose sight of this, there needs to be a shift in mindset, one where each aspiring Indiana Jones walking into these places feels a personal stake in their survival. Make them guardians of history, as you said earlier, so they help keep time's dust settled rather than stirred. It's a tricky mix, but if anyone can tackle a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma, it's us, buddy.
Sure makes you wonder if future tourists will need a license to tread historic ground, like a driver's ed for time travelers. Don't pass the test. Don't touch the past.
A license to time travel, huh? Funny you mentioned that, Simon. Sounds like a skit right out of a comedy show. But let's think about it. Would a history handler's permit be the most ridiculous idea? You laugh, but with the way some folks treat these ancient sites, maybe a quick crash course in do's and don'ts of historic etiquette wouldn't hurt. Picture this, a group of tourists at the entrance of the Acropolis, cramming for their last-minute heritage handling test, sweating over the difference between Doric and Ionic columns. A bit extreme? Maybe, but it drives home a point. Folks should have some basic respect and knowledge before walking on hallowed ground. Imagine we applied something similar to safaris. You want to see the lions? Better know not to leave your trash behind or to shout out while they're hunting. Otherwise, you scare off the wildlife, and then what's left for the next person? Sure, such measures might thin out the crowds, or some could claim it takes the spontaneity out of travel. But the flip side is, those who come through would likely appreciate and protect the heritage more. Is that elitist, or just being responsible stewards of history? Now there's a paradox worth thinking about.
Ha, Joe, you just birthed the historical DMV. Just imagine the line for that one.
Oh, that line would be a nightmare, wouldn't it? But expanding on the preservation paradox, if there were a historical DMV, I'd bet we'd see folks taking these places more seriously. It's about respect meeting regulation, kind of like traffic laws for tourists. And maybe we don't need an actual test or license, perhaps just a nudge in the right direction. A mandatory interactive app or a quick orientation video could work wonders. We'd still keep the gates wide open to all, but with that little extra preparation, visitors might think twice before leaving fingerprints where time has already left its mark. Imagine this exchange. You passed your Historical Respect 101. Here's your ticket to the ancient world. Enjoy and remember, treat history like you do grandma's fine china. Look, admire, but don't drop it. This way, at least when someone steps through those ruins, they're bringing along a dash of reverence with their camera. That balance is key, keeping history alive, touchable, yet untouched by harm.
You know, Joe, suddenly I'm picturing a future where time travel's a thing, and we're all freaking out about tourists putting sneaker prints on the original Declaration of Independence.
Haha, that'd be the ultimate test of our historical DMV idea. Don't worry, we'd make sure to include a no stepping on priceless documents section. Time Traveler Etiquette 101.
Picture this, Joe. Our historical DMV is in place, but let's crank it up a notch. Maybe you have to actually pass a history quiz from the era of the site you're visiting to gain entry. So if you can't tell your Nero from your Nerva, no Roman holiday for you. But seriously, imagine the chaos at the Colosseum with trivia battles happening outside. Sorry, sir, you must be this knowledgeable to ride this historical attraction. It sounds bananas, but wouldn't it be something to see people studying up like they're on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, just to get past the gates?
It's a wild idea, Simon, a history pop quiz as the price of admission. While it'd be a sight with tourists frantically flipping flashcards, I think it might miss the mark on what we want. Making folks cram for entry could turn these rich experiences into stress-filled exams. Remember, we're aiming to make history resonate, not intimidate. Imagine instead if we gamify that experience. No gates slammed in faces, but bonuses for knowing your stuff, like expedited lines or access to special sections for those who prove their historical chops. This way, you spark interest and respect without turning away the wide-eyed wanderer who just showed up eager to soak in the past. No prep required. Sure, the trivia battles at the Colosseum sound entertaining, but let's keep the entertainment inside the arena and make sure respecting history remains the main event.
Definitely, Joe. So here's the meat and potatoes. We want folks to roll up to these age-old party spots with a mix of awe and smarts. Throw history buffs and selfie snappers into the same pot, but add a pinch of thoughtful planning so nobody boils over. Could totally do like scavenger hunts or achievements unlocked for learning cool historical facts about the spot. Keeps it light, keeps it fun, and bam, sneaky learning's happening. Joe, that right there is the sweet center of our paradox lollipop. Giving people ways to engage that are as interesting as finding a 20 in last winter's coat. Now we're ticking both boxes, protecting the past and not scaring off the curious cats who just stumbled upon it. End of the day, respect and regulations don't need to mean red tape all around. They can be more like yellow brick roads, there to guide folks through the wonders without letting them trample all over the magic.
Spot on, Simon. And imagine if the sites themselves could talk, having a centuries-old temple rating your historical know-how, like a stone-faced ancient version of Yelp. Now that'd make heads turn.
Joe, that's a hoot. So there I was in Egypt, right? Hotter than a jalapeno's armpit. I'm at the Great Pyramids, and our guide is this old-timer with eyes like he's seen it all. Tells us a story about how the Sphinx would speak to the most respectful visitors, giving them wisdom or some mystical mumbo-jumbo. Now, picture me, trying my darnedest to be as reverent as a monk in a monastery. I'm eyeballing the Sphinx, hoping it'll start yapping any second, spouting secrets of the ancients. Of course, it never did, but wouldn't you know, that tall tale got the whole group tiptoeing around like we were on sacred ground. Even kept those notorious litterbugs from dropping their wrappers. Yeah, maybe we don't need statues giving out reviews, but if everyone played along with the idea, just imagine how neat and tidy we'd keep history. Probably cleaner than my place after a spring clean.
Well, Simon, here's a thought. What if those tall tales actually held a kernel of reality? We incentivize good behavior at kids' birthday parties with piñatas and goodie bags. Why not bring that to tourism? Leave no trace, get a little bonus, maybe early access the next day or a discount at the gift shop. But let's shake it up. What if the cleaner and more respectful you are, the less you pay for your ticket? Call it ethical discounts. The touristic economy then doesn't just function on sheer numbers, but rewards quality engagement. Some people might say, hey, now you're paying folks to behave. But I'd argue what we're doing is showing respect's got currency too. It puts everyone on notice. Want a cheaper trip? Want a better experience? Don't be just another face in the crowd. Be part of the place's ongoing story. Can we trust people to buy into that kind of system, though? There's always going to be someone trying to game it. And let's face it, human nature can be less Sphinx mystery and more crumbling cookie. The Sphinx staying mum might have been for the best, eh? Silence does speak louder than words sometimes. It lets us fill in the blanks with our imaginations. And who knows, maybe the Sphinx knew that the real lesson was the respect you carried home, not in the secrets whispered between stone lips.
Might as well earn frequent flyer points for good behavior. Call it the Sir Lancelot loyalty program. Show up, show respect, and next thing you know, you're knighted by the Sphinx himself.
Ha, next level. Your points turn into a virtual roundtable where every knighted traveler shares their epic travel tales. Watch the loyalty soar.
Joe, dig this. Every respectful visit racks up points, right? Not unlike arcade tickets. More points, more prestige. Imagine hitting the high score and boom, you're Sir Respect-a-Lot of the round table. And this isn't just for kicks, it's shaping up a fellowship of travel gurus, virtual ambassadors, if you will, who champion the cause of preserving our shared history. But here's the kicker. It's not just about discounts or bragging rights. This roundtable, it's a community swap shop of wisdom on how to tread lightly yet richly across the globe. Picture earning your spot by defending the integrity of the places we love, becoming part of an elite crew that doesn't just explore but also preserves. That's taking the preservation paradox from a brain teaser to reality, making history hip while holding tight to the heartstrings of heritage. Keep the charm, ditch the harm.
Well, let's flip the coin. The Sir Lancelot loyalty program, isn't it just a veneer of valor? It sounds grand, but what about accessibility and inclusivity? By creating an exclusive roundtable, we risk alienating those who might not have the means or knowledge to rack up points. And here's the rub. Travel shouldn't be about scoring social credit. It's a chance for exposure to different viewpoints, cultures, and histories. We want people from all walks of life wandering through the annals of time, inspiring awe in everyone, not just the elite few who can play the game well. Heritage sites belong to us all. Turning access into a leaderboard risks replacing wonder with competition. It's one thing to encourage good behavior, but quite another to turn historical exploration into an echo chamber where only the privileged or well-informed get the best stories to tell. That wouldn't be preserving history, it'd be gating it. The key should be to educate, invite, and inspire everyone to respect the past, not create an elitist heirloom out of reach for some.
Hold your horses, Joe. What if the roundtable's not about keeping folks out, but roping them in? Instead of some VIP club, think of it as a badge of honor for any Tom, Dick, or Harriet who gives a hoot about history. Doesn't matter if you're a scholar or a shoemaker. If you've got respect, you're in the club. It isn't about dollars and cents, it's about sense. A shot at being part of that community swap shop might be just the nudge folks need. Who wouldn't want to feel like their good deeds are getting noticed? Sure, there's this whole spiel about heritage for all, but let's face it, people love incentives. Give them a gold star for not touching the artifacts and watch the relics rest easy. What we're aiming for ain't exclusion. It's a massive, heartwarming group hug around history, rewarding anyone willing to embrace it. No secret handshake required.
All right, Simon, imagine the table's round because there's no head, no hierarchy. One person's keen observation about a hidden mosaic piece could be as cherished as another's lifelong study of Egyptian hieroglyphs. Plus, think of the tales that could come from this, spinning yarns that weave through time, stitching us all together in a brilliant historical tapestry.
Exactly. This tapestry doesn't care if you're a well-traveled sage or a wide-eyed rookie. Every thread adds to the richness. We want a whopping, welcoming roundtable where each chair's as good as the next, be it a grand throne or a three-legged stool. The value comes from the shared commitment to leaving places just as we found them. Or heck, maybe even better. It's kind of like those leave a penny, take a penny trays at the corner store, but for history. You drop in a bit of reverence, snag some wisdom, and the next person does the same. No matter who you are, what you know, or where you come from, that table's your spot to share a chomp of the past without taking a bite out of it. We're all curators and caretakers of the corridors of time. So yeah, Joe, let's spin yarns that'll make the past proud, not just stories for likes and retweets. Here's to a world where respect rings louder than footsteps through ancient halls.
All right, Simon, let's stir the historical soup a bit. The whole leave a penny, take a penny analogy is sweet, but what about those who only take and never leave anything behind? Or worse yet, those who leave things we'd rather not have, like graffiti or rubbish. Here's the controversial topping. What if reverence isn't voluntary but mandatory? Picture this. You mess up, you're barred, Game of Thrones shame bell and all. Seems harsh, I know, but stick with me. What if that fear keeps the ruins, well, less ruined? Would it actually be worth ostracizing the few to protect the experience for the many? Or does that just create an atmosphere of fear where folks are too scared to slip up and so they don't feel free to enjoy their journey through history? There's a fine line between respect and restriction, between guidance and guardrails. How do we ensure that our love for history doesn't morph into some form of historical hoarding, where we're so protective that nobody gets to touch the treasure. After all, these places weren't built to be seen from behind velvet ropes. They were once alive, noisy, messy, tactile. The preservation paradox tightrope walks between accessibility and accountability. If we lean too far one way, we might tumble into stifling gates and locked doors. Lean too far the other, and it's a free-for-all buffet with no regard for tomorrow's serving. It's more than just making sure history survives. It's about ensuring it thrives, open, breathing, and teaching us still. Where's the balance, Simon? And more importantly, who gets to decide?
Joe, wouldn't it be a riot if the history buff was the one making the rookie mistake and getting banned? History buffs preaching preserve and protect 1 second, then top in the naughty list the next. Now that's irony served extra crispy.
Rookies could end up schooling the buffs on how to respect the past. Imagine that plot twist.
Joe, let's chew on this. Tourists becoming the unexpected guardians. You've got your buffs diving deep into the past, but sometimes so much they don't see where they're stepping. Yet here come the newbies, cautious and curious, towing the line of respect like a cat on a windowsill. The paradox? The pros could learn a thing or two from the fresh peepers. Opening up the floor to everyone flips the script. Each visit's a chance to teach all, from history heavyweights to first-time flyers, about how fragile this tapestry is that we're all weaving with our visits. Old or new, each has a stitch to contribute without snagging the threads. We don't need the shame bell. What we need is to turn every gaffe into a lesson, not just for them, but for us all. Learning isn't a straight path. It's a scavenger hunt with fun lurking around every historical nook and cranny.
Absolutely. Even seasoned travelers can stumble, and new eyes keep us all humble. Mistakes make for teachable moments, not barriers to entry. Let's turn every trip into a lesson learned and shared.
Sure, teachable moments are all well and good. However, if travelers keep stumbling without real consequences, what's stopping those slip-ups from becoming the norm? While I'm all for inclusivity, there's gotta be a line. Otherwise, we'll have folks treating ancient sites like their own backyard, only no one's picking up after their mess. There has to be some weight to the rules. If reverence is just an optional extra, how many will willingly choose it over convenience or a cool selfie? Some sort of mandatory reverence might actually preserve these treasures for future generations. After all, if they crumble on our watch, what's left to learn from? Sometimes, the fear of getting dinged might just be the torch lighting the way to more careful conduct. And if that comes off as harsh, maybe it's because history itself isn't soft. It survives only through the stern hands of time. We're not talking about medieval stocks in the public square, but knowing there are real stakes could help safeguard history's hallowed halls.
You've got a point. Without real consequences, there's little incentive to change careless behavior. It goes beyond personal choice into collective responsibility. If we want these sites standing for the next millennia, respect can't just be optional. The paradox is this: how do you keep places alive with stories and visitors but not love them to death? We need tourists for interest and investment, yet their footfalls are the very thing threatening the integrity of these ancient spaces. So what's the golden ticket? Maybe it's about crafting rules that teach rather than punish, and when necessary, enforcing respectfully to show care without shutting doors. Let's create an environment that says, tread lightly, for you walk on whispered history.
Joe, you're right on the money. It's like walking your dog. Keep it on a leash so it doesn't ruin someone's picnic. We can't be all carrot. Where's the stick if folks start treating heritage sites like their personal sketchbooks? The golden ticket? Education with a sprinkle of enforcement. Not the fun police type, but like a guardian of the galaxy. Someone who gently nudges you back in line when you forget. This ain't Disneyland. We don't need to kick people to the curb for every misstep, but let's keep it real. Rules are as useful as rubber boots on a rainy day. Love history? Show it by playing nice, or else face being tossed from the sandbox without your bucket. It's not mean, it's preserving the sandbox so everyone gets to build castles, not just Instagram forts.
Let's not forget, tourists can also be the heroes here, like secret agents of preservation.
Secret agents of preservation? These tourists are sometimes more like bulls in a china shop. Picture this. For every secret agent tiptoeing around ruins, there's another one with a selfie stick, accidentally knocking over a priceless vase. What we need is to train our tourist agents better, give them gadgets and know-how. A real mission brief. Protect history at all costs. If they choose to accept it, they get the cool title. But remember, Joe, even James Bond had rules to play by. He couldn't just jet ski through an ancient temple without M giving him an earful. So let's keep the mystery and allure of being that secret agent, but ditch the reckless abandon. We're safeguarding our past, not filming an action flick. It sounds way cooler to be the person who guards legends than the one who becomes legendary for wrecking them.
You know, Simon, it reminds me of this time my uncle told me about his trip to Pompeii. Walking through those ancient cobbled streets, he was mesmerized by the city frozen in time. Intent on capturing everything on his camera, he almost bumped into a cordoned-off fresco. Fortunately, a guide caught him just in time and instead of scolding, shared stories about how everyday life was when Vesuvius erupted. That little heart-and-mouth moment, it changed something in him. He started seeing beyond the viewfinder, soaking up the history, the human connection to these artifacts. The guide's storytelling turned him from an absent-minded tourist into a respectful wanderer. It wasn't about no-touching signs. It was seeing himself as part of a bigger picture, a steward of stories waiting to be told attentively, not just captured hastily. Uncle came back with fewer photos, but richer tales. He realized that being in those spaces, feeling the gravity of history underfoot, was a privilege we've got to protect, not by wagging fingers, but by inspiring awe, awareness, and a sense of shared guardianship. That's what it takes, not just a passing interest, but a lasting respect.
Joe, that Pompeii tale is something else. But it sparks a question. How do we turn more snap-happy tourists into storytellers like your uncle so they feel that same weight of history beneath their feet?
That's the million-dollar question, right? People gotta realize they're stepping into a damn time machine when they visit places like Pompeii. You've gotta stop, look around, and think, holy smokes, this was someone's home. It shouldn't be about ticking off a bucket list and moving on. It's about getting tourists to put their phones down for a minute, breathe in the air, and really connect with the story of what went down there. You don't just rock up to ancient ruins to snap a pic. You go there to get a slice of human history. So maybe we need more of those guides that aren't just pointing out facts, but are making these stories come alive, getting you to feel like you're part of it all. That's how you turn a tourist into a true traveler, someone who carries the story with them and passes it on.
Joe, stepping into Pompeii is like jumping in a time machine without the manual. You're just winging it through history. Like, whoa, did I just crush Caesar's sandal? My bad. It's where your selfie stick doubles as a timeline poker. Oops, poked 79 AD right there. You gotta tread light, or you might just step on some ancient dude's toga party spot.
The preservation paradox is a cultural tightrope walk. Take the Egyptian pyramids or Machu Picchu, for instance. They've seen surges in visitation, which not only raises funds for preservation, but also risks damage to these fragile sites. High foot traffic wears away stones, erosion lurks, and some folks can't resist leaving a mark, literally. Yet without visitor interest and their dollars, these places might fall prey to neglect or worse, commercial development. Now consider Venice, a living city battling both high tourist numbers and the threat of rising waters due to climate change. Here, tourism supports the economy but also strains infrastructure. Visitors often miss that their day trip impacts real lives in centuries-old urban fabric. Over in Asia, there's Angkor Wat, where conservationists juggle preserving intricate stone carvings while managing the swathes of tourists. Meanwhile, places like Bhutan cap visitor numbers, sacrificing potential revenue for conservation and cultural integrity. These scenarios underscore a global challenge, respecting our shared history while keeping it accessible and viable. It sharply brings into focus the need for sustainable tourism practices, coherent regulatory policies, and education that taps into our collective responsibility to treasure and safeguard these irreplaceable windows into human heritage.
Folks, Put down that carved piece of Colosseum you pocketed and perk up those ears. Big thanks for tuning in to Infinite Podcast, your daily dose of delightful debates. And hey, don't just ghost us like a pharaoh's curse, all right? Swing by tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern for more banter with me and Joe. Until then, keep your feet off the ruins and stay awesome. Catch ya on the flip side.
Tomorrow, let's dive into why people whisper in museums. Is it reverence or just fear of a stern-looking guard? Catch you then.
Hey, that's what's about. The preservation paradox. We love these spots for their stories, but somehow can't help be the plot twist by leaving our own not-so-great mark. Gotta strike the balance between letting folks rubberneck through time and making sure they don't back over history in a tour bus. Venice with its sinking problems, or Angkor Wat bracing against love-struck tourists, carving initials into old stones. Joe, it's clear as day, we're at a cultural crossroads here. Education, crowd control, maybe even tech solutions. Virtual tours, anyone? There's no one-size-fits-all, but I say cultivate respect without shackling curiosity. Airways ticketed, boarding has been announced. It's time for destination sound tourism practices. Fasten those seatbelts. We're taking off on tomorrow's episode.